This is my third and final video on Sparta. In this video I'll be discussing the fall of Sparta, my conclusions, and my predictions for our society and how it will fall. The fall of Sparta was no great battle or an opposing enemy. It was simply their own ideology that destroyed them. See, Sparta, through its many reforms, suffered a massive population decline throughout all of its history. From the beginning of its reforms in the 7th to 8th century, its population continued to decline. By the 4th century BC, Sparta's citizen population had fallen from 9,000 to 1,000 and would continue to fall to 700. This population decline clearly was a result of the sheer harshities of male life within Sparta. First you had to pass inspection as an infant, then you had to survive the MGTOW military academy, and then you had to survive any battles or wars you were sent off to. This resulted in killing off the males in their youth. And remember from my second video, Sparta prioritized the young breeding, not an old man and a young woman. Both had to be young to create the strongest offspring. The 4th century BC was also important because it brought around the death nail. This death nail came in the form of some final land reforms. These land reforms opened up the ability to bequeath land, and with that ended the communist system of land, and this prevented men from being able to make any substantial amount of wealth. And it made women extremely rich and powerful, because when a man goes off to war, he's going to write a will bequeathing his land to his wife, and of course the dowry system came back in where men could give women land as a gift during marriage. So women became very rich and very powerful. Naturally, this would have created a negative system for men, because how the hell are they supposed to be able to make any kind of wealth, seeing that their only path in life was to be a soldier, a full-time soldier? The only way they could sustain themselves was if the state gave them land and helots to work the land. So as we see, Sparta basically did everything it could to make it as impossible for men to thrive. And as much as we may know the reality that one man can impregnate 100 women, it doesn't matter if 50 of the children are male and they're going to go through a process like the MGTOW that is most likely going to kill them before they ever reach adulthood and the ability for them to impregnate other women. In my opinion, during the 4th century BC in Sparta was the birthplace of feminism. Feminism as I know it, which is a movement of whatever women want at that very moment, even if it is to their own detriment. For this is clearly what happened in Sparta. Women wanted to be revered, women wanted to be glorified, women eventually wanted more money and power, so they persuaded the state to change the laws. Now, yes, of course, this would have happened through men. They would have bribed men to vote for what women want them to vote for. And as men would be lacking in land, lacking in money, they would obviously oblige, because they have to be able to pay their barracks fees that they were forced to pay, because they had to live in the barracks from age 20 to 30. And with no land and no helots to work it, you got no way to make money except for accept it from the very rich and now very powerful women to vote the way they want you to vote. Aristotle, the very famous Greek philosopher, he was an Athenian and bitterly hated Sparta. And by his day, they had fallen to 1,000 population. He blamed all of women's power in Sparta on the fact that men were forbidden from practicing homosexuality. Now clearly this is just our mistranslation. What he would have meant was practice bisexuality. Within the Greek society, they were very big on bisexuality. Women were only for breeding purposes and political alliances. When that is all the worth you see in women, and you can get your sexual gratification from other men, always keeping in mind it's a lot easier to get sex from men, women's social power evaporates. For it is important to keep in mind women wouldn't have sex with you, particularly in the ancient world, if you didn't marry them first. If they got pregnant, they were solely responsible for the child, not you. So they would naturally hold out. Whereas if your society had a bisexual society, even if it's just for the men, then men can find sexual gratification within each other, and far easier too, because it would also not result in an accidental pregnancy. Because of that reality, men wouldn't have the same fear of being left with a baby and having no means to look after it. So they're going to put out a lot easier. And in my mind, that was what Aristotle was commenting on. The fact that it is female nature to make the man work as hard as possible to get her vag. I see this happening in today's society. Think about when you're trying to get a girl to give up her virginity to you. When you're a teenager, you have to work bloody hard for that. And even when you're at a party, trying to get the woman to actually have sex with you, you have to jump through as many hoops as possible. The more hoops you jump through, the more valuable she is. And what I see is because men and teenage boys have to put in all this effort just to get some vag, they end up lying to themselves about their first and almost all of their sexual experiences. Oh yeah, she was great, it was awesome, losing my virginity was intense. And he lies to himself and his mates because he had to put in so much work to get this really worthless reward. Because the woman just didn't either know how to engage a man in sex, or just didn't care to. So he has to lie to himself to be able to cope with it, or else he's a sucker, and he just got suckered in to buying her so many drinks, giving her so many compliments, putting in so much time, effort, and energy for such little pointless reward. I again believe Aristotle understood this reality, and that it's just simply the histories that have whittled it down to a pointless quote that is misrepresented to mean that, hey, you either got to be gay or women will have power. As Sparta's population fell to drastic levels, drastic measures were taken. Laws were introduced to punish young people who hadn't gotten married. This clearly wasn't a law that would punish women, particularly not in a Spartan-like society where women are glorified. The reality simply would have been that it would be a punishment system for men who didn't marry at an early age. Because the population ratio would have favoured women, meaning that there would have been more women to men. And you can't make 5 women marry the 1 man. So for all those MGTOWs out there saying, well, once the population starts to drop dramatically, women will be forced to go back into the kitchen or some silly nonsense like that. No, men will just be forced or punished, some form of bachelor tax will be created, and that's it. Even with the declining population, Sparta still managed to survive invasion and other threats simply by its reputation. When Philip of Macedonia, Alexander the Great's father, was invading and conquering all of Greece, he sent in a message to Sparta saying, "If I invade Sparta, I will raze it to the ground." Sparta responded with a message saying, "If." Not even Alexander the Great would call himself King of Sparta. He would say King of Asia and all of Greece except Sparta. When Rome came in to conquer Greece, it came in under the falsity that it was going to liberate it from Macedonian rule. Again, Sparta didn't get invaded. What happened was Rome just conquered all of the surrounding territory to Sparta, and eventually its culture became the dominant culture. And that is how Sparta fell. It just simply faded out of existence. No grand battle, no being conquered, no pillaging, no destruction. It just faded out because its system of governing itself was so flawed that eventually it made it so difficult for men to thrive that men just simply died off. And without men, even with the ability of 1 man to fertilize multiple women, it still could not sustain itself. Now for my conclusions. I hope by now I have proven my point that Sparta and our current societies in the West have many similarities. and that from these similarities to make reasonable comparisons and even a reasonable prediction. As we saw in ancient Sparta, the paths for success for men were very few and were extremely difficult. The same thing is happening in our Western society today. The paths for success are dwindling and are becoming even more difficult, and many men are just simply dropping out. What is the point in fighting with all your might for success when there is such little success to go about, and all it takes is for one person to be just that little bit better than you, and they get the success instead of you? Men from a very early age understand success is necessary to be able to get a girlfriend, a wife, and a family. It's made very clear to them that if they can't buy a woman a drink and give her a good time, financially wise, then he's not getting the girl. So hypothetically, let's state there's only 100 positions for success, but there's 1,000 men attempting to get those 100 positions. Only 10% of them will reach that level of success. Why bother playing such pathetic odds? Go play another game, or just simply do nothing is the result. So I predict that our Western nations will continue on this path of making success all that more unachievable for men, and will continue to reward women with, well, basically middle management positions. Bureaucrats and HR positions, and they'll feel like, oh, I've got a career because I'm sitting behind a desk. More and more men will simply drop out. They won't necessarily go their own way because they won't have the information we have. They'll just simply stop trying. This will lead to more crime, as it will be the only path left available to men. It will also be the only way men can join together as a group and get any kind of bastardized father figure and male comradeship. Of course, it's all bullshit because they're criminals, but it will feel like the real thing, or as close to the real thing as they've ever known. And of course, the only men that will still be getting laid will be criminals because, well, hey, bad boys are sexy, aren't they? This will create a scenario of the only people who are still breeding will basically be the bottom feeders. This will create a situation of mass single motherhood as being the only form of parenting. The state will continue to step in, take money from men and give it to women in forms of payments to pay women to get pregnant and to be single mothers. Basically, women's employment will fall to nothing more than getting randomly knocked up by some random man, and the whole situation will continue to deteriorate because nobody in any form of power to change things will ever point the finger at women and say, hey, you've got to change. You've got to do better, improve, or get the fuck out. No punishments will be levied upon women. In fact, all that will happen is just more and more rewards will continue to be thrown onto women for votes. I predict that this system will reach critical mass and then collapse in on itself around the year of 2150. And what will happen is the Western nation and its cultures will just fade out and be absorbed by more predominant, more successful cultures that surround it. Currently, 75% of all new Muslims are women.